This morning it is truly a pleasure to welcome two members of our congregation to the pulpit this morning. Throughout this year we are looking at the theme of journeys, and from time to time we've asked folks in our congregation if they would come and share a pivotal moment or two in their faith journey and how that has affected their lives and their faith. And so this morning Ellie Flowers and Dwayne Anderson will be doing that for us. And we're really grateful to you for doing this. I'll be reading their scripture passages and then they will be sharing with you. So our first passage comes from the book of Deuteronomy. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. Keep these words that I am commanding you today in your heart. Recite them to your children and talk about them when you are at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you rise. Bind them as a sign on your hand, fix them as an emblem on your forehead, and write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. And our second scripture passage tells the story of Jesus' baptism. It's from the Gospel of Mark, the first chapter, verses 9 to 11. In those days, Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. And just as he was coming up out of the water, he saw the heavens torn apart and the Spirit descending like a dove on him. And a voice came from heaven, "You are my Son, the Beloved. With you I am well pleased."
Good morning. You're a hardy group. Congratulations for making it to church today. Good job. When asked to speak about a pivotal moment in my faith journey, lots of small moments, though not truly pivotal ones, came to my mind. You know, the kind of moments you have when you feel someone is watching out for you. A well-timed call from a friend when you are upset. A good health report from your doctor. A time when all your small concerns are put to rest as everything comes together. Not pivotal to be sure, but an important confirmation of a person's faith in their God. Then, of course, one person's pivotal moment is by necessity personal and may not have the same impact that another person would experience through the same event. So I went back to think about pivotal times that may have transpired in my whole life and realized that my faith journey and the development of my faith was changed way back when I was 13 and in the baptism class of the Baptist church that I grew up in. Now, I had always attended Sunday school and worship. My parents were very involved church members, and we went to church every Sunday. But when I began our baptism class, the teacher was the minister of the church. This was my first encounter with a teacher who was a Bible scholar. Until that time, I was appropriately immersed in the Bible stories of childhood classes, simply put and supported by the faithful lay teachers of our church. But this new scholarly questioning approach, this investigation into the meaning, the roots, the historical setting, and the interpretation of the Bible was new to me. You know, at 13, you are entering the adolescent years when you begin to question the adult voices around you. Theologian James Fowler, who wrote Stages of Faith in 1981, described 6 stages of faith development related to the works of developmental psychologist Jean Piaget and psychologist Lawrence Kohlberg. It turns out that I was right on time to enter the stage of synthetic conventional faith, which generally starts at about the age of 13, when children are able to think abstractly and integrate other points of view, and so claim a faith of their own, though it usually continues to be the faith of their family. At this stage, people start to have the ability to see things from someone else's perspective. Unrelated stories can now be seen as more cohesive narrative about values and morals. So there is nothing remarkable about that, but this new learning for me became the basis of what would later be the foundation of my faith. that the Bible could be and should be taken at more than face value. The idea intrigued me. Reverend Hensley talked about biblical times. He often dissected the earlier Greek to demonstrate his points. This was a favorite pastime of his, and he pointed out to us that these factors affected the various interpretations of the Bible, and I began to learn that there were many. He encouraged us to read, to question, to review, and discuss. So that was it, my pivotal moment. As much as it fit into James Fowler's scheme of things, it was significantly important as it enabled me to continue my faith journey. So on the occasion of my baptism, I had learned something of significance. As I professed my faith through immersion, a new recognition had taken root, that I could be informed by study, by reflection, by questioning, and that my faith journey could grow and continue. As it turns out, I became an educator. I believe that learning is lifelong. In my case, I have tried to never stop growing as an educator, learning more about child growth and development, best practices, and brain building. My experience at my earlier church produced a person who seeks to understand her faith through reflection and study. I believe that as a person of faith, this journey is never finished, that you and I are lifelong learners. Some years passed. Reverend Hensley retired. I went to college and left my childhood home and married. When Wally and I were searching for a church after moving to Beverly, we discovered this church with a congregation that was not afraid of questions, reflection, and study, that supported the ability of the intellect to maintain a faithful posture in the world. It was another pivotal moment. Rather than just talking the talk, preaching scripture by rote, and defending the status quo, this church was walking the walk. Its preachers informed and lent insight to our faith experience, and the congregation consistently searched for a way to bring Christianity into the world. It was and continues to be the place that I needed to let my faith journey unfold. The journey of all my life had led me to understand that my faith had a conscience and that this church could help me live it out. I am so thankful that we were led here.
Our next scripture reading is from the Psalms. I just have to say, I'm glad your journey led you here too. Can't just leave that unsaid. Psalm 46, verses 1 through 7. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth should change, though the mountains shake in the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble with its tumult. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of the city, it shall not be moved. God will help it when the morning dawns. The nations are in an uproar, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice and the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us, the God of Jacob, our refuge.
I'd like to thank Beth for not only inviting me to do this today, but also for helping me with some of the ideas that I had. The early years of my faith journey were pretty typical for someone growing up in a Methodist family. My parents had strong religious roots. My grandmother on my mother's side was the church organist at a small church in North Grovendale, Connecticut for many years. I remember as a child we loved to visit her because she had a pedal pump organ in her room. Probably young people have never even seen one of those, in her home. My father's family were Evangelical United Brethren in Iowa, where he went to Cornell College as it was a Methodist school. Later, the EUB Church merged with the Methodist Church, and thus the name United Methodist Church. My grandmother, on my father's side, her lifelong wish was that my father become a minister. It took him a while. World War II, the Great Depression got in the way, but at age 42, he took his first parish, I should say his first 4 parishes, because his first job, he had to preach 4 times on Sunday. You might think that my faith journey would be somewhat unique as a child of a minister, but with a few exceptions, I don't think that was the case, because my parents were such devout Christians that regardless of the occupations, I think I would have been brought up pretty much the same. But there were some fun and funny experiences being a preacher's kid. One summer day, a friend of mine up the street, Charlie, I think we were about 7 or 8 years old, he came in from the yard to have lunch with my parents. Charlie interrupted as my father was about to say grace by saying, "I know you're a minister, so we have to say a prayer before we eat, but please make it quick. I hate cold soup." Other exceptions to a normal childhood were that my brother and I were baptized at Marsh Chapel at Boston University by a classmate of my dad's. That my brother and I were repeatedly asked from an early age if we were going to be ministers. And that the M in Methodist actually stands for most ministers must move more. I was born in Needham, but I lived in 5 different towns, all in upstate New York, before I moved to Beverly after graduate school to work at Endicott College. At that point, I began to get involved in a local church again, and this time it was the Congregational Church in Manchester. In fact, Leslie Brennan and Sarah Allen were 2 of my students as I headed up the youth group. So the exceptions were few, and otherwise my experience was pretty typical. Sunday school, church suppers, bazaars. I love church suppers. At dessert time, Calla Calkins, a grandmotherly type, would always come by my brother and I and remind us that apple pie without some cheese was like a kiss without a squeeze. I went to summer camp, attended religious classes, and back then we actually had release time from school where we would go to the church of our choice for religious lessons. So I joined the church, and my faith journey took a big change when we moved to a high school, to a town on the Hudson River, the extreme northern Hudson River. The last place that's navigable by ships. The challenge there was that the community was 90% Catholic. Most of the dances were at St. Joseph's School, and given my parents' background and the fact that my mother's father was an immigrant from Northern Ireland, they weren't too keen on my brother and I attending. The athletic teams actually said the Hail Mary before games, and the basketball players always crossed themselves before foul shots. The ecumenical movement of the mid-60s eased the situation a bit. The one thing I remember from church visitations at the time was that the Baptist minister said that the only thing in general you could say about the Baptist church was that you could not say anything in general about the Baptist church. But 2 of the most powerful experiences of my faith journey came shortly thereafter. I began to get very involved in current events and enjoyed watching the evening news every night, which at that point in time, you may remember, was only 15 minutes. But as a part of a class project, I read the book Why We Can't Late by Dr. Martin Luther King. He got me to thinking about my faith in a more practical way, by how he put his faith on the line in his actions to bring justice and equality for minorities in this country. In about the same time, we had traveled south on a couple of occasions to go to Florida. And on the way, on Old Route 1, we saw the colored and white drinking fountains and colored and white windows at the ice cream parlors. At that point in time, I-95 wasn't completed, so we traveled along Old Route 1 through the Deep South. And it really gave us a glimpse of what the life was like for African Americans in the 60s. Dr. King's book and his life made me think about religion, made me think truly about living my religion. Dr. King lived in what was written in James 1:22. Be doers of the word and not merely bearers who deceive themselves. At the same time, many of us were growing more and more concerned about the war in Vietnam. At this point, I had moved into college, and I had lost 2 friends in Vietnam. Joe D'Angelico was a bright student, an athlete, and our class VP. And Bill McCarthy was the older brother of a tennis teammate of mine, and he played baritone horn next to me in the drum and bugle corps. Their deaths brought the war home to many of us as we began to think about the war in terms of morality. My father suggested I read the book, Vietnam, Crisis of Conscience. The book was written by a Protestant professor of religion at Stanford, a rabbi at the Jewish Theological Seminary, and a Roman Catholic professor at Stanford University. All three were members of clergy and laymen concerned about Vietnam. Senator Eugene